we'll start with this. Well, some unexpected news out of the super lightweight division. It was rumored that the unified champion, Jessica McCaskill, would be contesting for what is the vacant IBF title against an opponent that had yet to be announced sometime in the near future. But there has been a change, there has been a deviation, and it appears that the former Argentinian unified champion, McGee-Esteche, is going to be squaring off against none other than Mary McGee for what is that vacant IBF title. We'll say I feel a bit blindsided by this news. You know, we talked about it here on the channel that McGee-Esteche had snapped back that stint of inactivity. She did have a little tune-up fight, little warm-up fight. Looked like she was trying to get back into the mix of things, though I didn't expect that she would be contesting for a world title so soon. Perhaps her being the former unified champion is what lended itself to that consideration. It could be that way. I mean, most people don't realize that McGee-Esteche was the unified champion at the weight, holding 3 of the 4 major titles, the 4th being held by Erika Farias. And in their fight,
about 2 years ago,
back in 2017, Erika Farias did beat her. She did unseat her, though oddly enough, the match itself wasn't being billed as a unification match. None of their world titles were on the line in that fight. Thereafter, Erika remained the WBC super lightweight champion, but McGee-Esteche, she took a break from the sport. She didn't fight at all in the subsequent year thereafter of 2018, and only recently came back
this year,
in July of this year. As far as Erika, we know what happened. Erika moved on from that McGee-Esteche fight and eventually lost her title, her green belt, to Jessica McCaskill, who's coming off of another victory over Erika in what was the rematch earlier this year. And the super lightweight division is a division where the topography has changed quite a bit since McGee-Esteche was floating around. A sizable moneymaker in Katie Taylor has moved into the super lightweight division. And in that way, all these different girls that are out there, they now have an incentive to get their hands on a world title because, as we all know, Katie Taylor, the moneymaker, she wants to unify. She wants to become undisputed in a second weight class. In order for her to do that, she's going to need all the belts. Well, these girls, if they can get their hands on one of those belts, they may be involved in a very interesting situation. Hence the resurgence of McGee-Esteche, hence the resurgence of a Mary McGee. Let's talk about Mary. You know, Mary's actually a pretty polished boxer. I mean, this girl shows legitimate talent, legitimate skills. Her only drawback is that she hasn't really been that active the last couple of years. You know, sparse activity here and there.
Fighting once a year the last few years.
She only fought once in 2015, once in 2016, didn't fight at all in 2017, then again once in 2018, and once again this year. So this is what I mean by sparse activity. It's hard to build momentum for a fighter when you're on that kind of a schedule, when you're only fighting once a year. Now, Mary McGee is a veteran of the sport. I mean, she may not look it, but she's been around, and she's been around for a very long time.
About 14 years.
Actually debuted as a pro boxer back in 2005. 2005, folks. That's before Katie Taylor and Clarissa Shields won their gold medals in the Olympics. That's before Cecilia Brækhus even won a world title in the welterweight division. It's before all of that. That's how long Mary McGee has been around. Mary McGee has locked horns with the likes of both Holly Holm and Erika Farias. They both did beat her. I think it's important to note that when she stepped up in competition, she did lose those fights. I think you might want to take stock of that, but better still, here today, she is on a winning streak, more or less. It's been a long time since Mary lost a fight, and she hasn't lost very many fights overall. She's got a pro record of 25 wins and only 3 losses. It's a solid record. You get a look at her. You see what she's working with, and I have to say that defensively, Mary McGee is definitely a sharp pencil. I mean, she's got the upper body movement, the angles, rolling punches off the shoulder, the footwork, the mobility. Defensively, Mary McGee has some virtues. Offensively, there's not quite that much snap in those punches. I attribute that to the sparse activity. That, you know, the punches, you know, they kind of just slap. They're a little flat. And I think that a boost in activity could result in a sharper Mary McGee offensively. I will say that she is a well-rounded fighter. She's certainly experienced. She knows what she's doing out there, and I think that she stands a legitimate chance of becoming the IBF 140-pound champion. McGee-Esteche. is not to be written off. You know, these Argentinian fighters, you get a look at them and you think to yourself that there's not much to their game, you know, because most of them are very scrappy and very aggressive. But once you're in the ring with these kinds of fighters, the difficulties arise that you can nail these fighters clean and they don't seem to want to go away. They're going to continue to come forward, march forward, and pressure you. And that's what Mary McGee is going to have to deal with. She's going to have to use those legs, pump out that jab, and be defensively responsible, not allow herself to get drawn out into a war as Ana Laura Esteche would like. I think that Mary McGee stands a legitimate chance of becoming the IBF champion, and that would put her in the mix of everything. That would put her in the mix of a Jessica McCaskill conversation. That would put her in the mix of a Katie Taylor conversation. Those are the world titleists at 140 pounds, folks. So if Mary gets that belt, she's in the mix with all of them. One of them is going to have to fight her. I will say that I don't think it's going to be Katie, because Katie has a full plate. There are so many other things that are happening that take a precedence to what could be a Mary McGee fight if she wins. You know, there's a Pursoon rematch, a Serrano fight. People are still waiting for those things to happen, and I think one of them may come before another unification match. That leaves Jessica McCaskill with the task of unifying with the winner of McGee versus Esteche. This is something I expect to see, and I like this proposition. I like the idea of that fight. I could see that happening sometime early next year at a venue over there in Chicago, where Jessica's from. I could see that happening. Just as well, Cristina Linardo, too, may have just lost her title to Katie Taylor, but she's not out of the conversation. It's entirely probable that Cristina will challenge either Jessica McCaskill or Mary McGee, or the winner of what could be a fight between them. I mean, Christina's still floating around, and she's still a dangerous fighter. Don't let Katie Taylor, offsetting her aggression, fool you into thinking that that's something anybody can just go in there and do. Christina's a very dangerous fighter, okay? Very dangerous. Now, you know, we may be getting a bit ahead of ourselves. The victor in the fight between McGee and Esteche hasn't been determined. McGee's got to get past Esteche for all these things to come into fruition, to become palpable conversations. I actually think that she can do it. I think she can.
Might become the IBF champion at 140.
So just keep your eyes peeled for this on December 5th. It will be viable via UFC Fight Pass, and we'll get to find out who's going to be the next world champion at 140 pounds. In other news, WBC heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder had this to say. He says, Luis Ortiz is avoided by many, and I don't avoid anyone.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the article, he talks about how he's a champion and he's not in the business of avoiding people. That he had heard that Luis Ortiz has a daughter who suffers from an illness. She does have a disability, and Wilder sympathized with that because his own daughter has a disability. She has spina bifida. And, you know, he had me up until that point. You know, I mean, that's respectable. I can respect that. I actually find that a bit admirable if that was the actual motivation for Wilder giving him that title shot way back when in the first place. But where he lost me is when he starts going off about how Luis Ortiz is so avoided and he's not in the business of avoiding people when, a newsflash, Luis Ortiz stopped being the boogeyman a long fucking time ago, okay? This is the same guy that was just offered a career-high payday that he didn't even get fighting you the first time out. They offered him several times over what he made with you to fight Anthony Joshua. And somehow, at the precipice of fighting for 3 world titles, more money than he's ever seen as a professional boxer, more money than he's actually made in every single fight as a professional boxer, somehow, at the precipice of this, his own team manages to fumble the ball. No, I know what it is. It was deliberate. The call-outs, all of that, Anthony Joshua, it was all clout chasing, okay? He was simply using that guy's name to stay in certain conversations in regards to fights that they weren't going to let him have anyway. That's what it looks like to me. They knew full well, in all likelihood, even if Ortiz didn't.
Maybe he didn't.
Maybe some members of his team, those who handle his career, maybe they knew that word had come down from Big Al to keep Luis Ortiz on standby, keep his schedule free, so that when that Wilder rematch rolls around, he'll be available to have it. And I think, personally, that they have costed Luis Ortiz a lot of money, because it's questionable as to whether or not he will actually clear $7 million to fight Wilder in a second fight on pay-per-view. I'll tell you the truth that I'm not buying that fight. I don't know if you are, but I know that I'm not. And there seem to be a lot of people out there in the American boxing community who share that sentiment, that that is not a pay-per-view worthy fight because it's a recycled fight. There was no need for a rematch. He got knocked out. What are you fighting him again for?
What's the point?
You got Leonard Ellerby, right? He's saying that he saw Deontay Wilder and he actually praised him for not taking the $100 million or $120 million from DAZN, because that would have effectively put a cap on his earnings, that he could very well stand to make more than that. But had he took the DAZN deal, the amount of money would have been a set amount. And that's a lot of bullshit, because in order for it to be a smart move, the way Leonard Ellerby thinks it's a smart move, the only way it's a smart move is if Wilder ends up making in excess of $100 or $120 million in his next 3 fights. Well, his next 2 fights. He already had the Brazil fight, and he didn't make $20 million off that fight like DAZN offered him.
It's all documented.
According to Stephen Espinoza himself, who flipped the bill, they didn't match what DAZN offered Wilder. They didn't give him $20 million for that fight. So you're already starting off at a deficit. In order for it to be a smart move to turn down $100 or $120 million on the premise that you might make more, you have to actually make more. So the question then becomes, what are the odds that Deontay Wilder makes $40 million in his very next fight? What are the odds?
Huh?
What are the odds that he makes $80 million? He clears, just him. What are the odds that he clears $80 million in his next 2 fights when he couldn't even clear $20 million with his last fight? Like DAZN offered him for the exact same guy. They offered him $20 million to fight the same guy he ended up fighting anyway for less money. What are the odds that he clears that amount of money? Because that's the only way that would be a smart move, that would have been a smart move. If you actually end up making more than you would have made had you took the deal. And where does that leave all the hyperbole, as it were? All the talk of one face, one name, one champion, yet every time they offered you an opportunity, I should say, every time they offered this guy an opportunity to achieve that goal, to grab that brass ring, he's the one who walked away. I'm telling you, they're trying desperately to save face here. And it might fool some of the less intelligent members of the boxing community, but anybody with a calculator can see that was a boneheaded fucking move, and in all likelihood, Wilder doesn't clear $80 million in his next 2 fights, because he didn't clear $20 million in his last fight, and that's according to the guy who flipped the bill. So if you got any arguments you want to levy towards that, you can levy them towards Stephen Espinoza. Now, just in regards to that upcoming rematch between Wilder and Ortiz, Tyson Fury, the lineal heavyweight champion, as if you haven't heard that 1,000 fucking times in the last couple of weeks and months, he's mapped out a plan of action if by some chance Wilder falters and loses to Luis Ortiz in the rematch. He's saying that if it happens that way, what Fury's going to do is he's going to look to fight the winner of Joshua versus Ruiz, their rematch. Because, in all likelihood, if Wilder by some chance loses to Ortiz, he's likely going to have a rubber match immediately after that, at which point Fury will look to challenge the winner of Joshua versus Ruiz II instead, since Wilder's going to be busy. That's the way the cookie crumbles. The intriguing portion of these quotes, of these articles, this article, is that Tyson Fury said he's got 3 fights left in his contract. In that way, you kind of get a fix, an idea of Tyson Fury's headspace, that he's looking to maximize his earnings in what fights he has left in his contract. It was rumored that at least 2 of those fights that he's got left were going to be Wilder fights, that they'd have the rematch, and that there may have been, maybe, I mean, we really don't know, but that there may be a 3rd fight, yeah, a rubber match, that those 2 guys were spoken for at least the next 2 fights. That was the story going around. That was the rumor. Well, Tyson Fury appears to be thinking 10 steps ahead, that, you know, for any eventuality that comes up, it's not going to fuck up my fucking money, it's not going to stifle my earnings, I'm going to get paid. And that appears to be what he's doing. I don't think Wilder's going to lose the rematch. I don't. I think that Luis Ortiz is a older, slower, more vulnerable fighter than he was the first time out with Deontay Wilder. Since that Deontay Wilder fight, we've seen him fail to put away Travis Kaufman. We've seen him languish a bit, struggle with the likes of a Christian Hammer. Christian Hammer, who, you know, I mean,
Give me a break.
I give anybody from F.A. Ajagba to Tony Yoka to Joe Joyce good odds to not just beat Christian Hammer, but knock him the fuck out, you know? I give any one of those guys good odds to knock Christian Hammer out. So the fact that Luis Ortiz didn't, I think it does kind of signal some decline. I mean, Luis Ortiz is still a skilled boxer. He's still a crafty southpaw. I don't think he's everything that Wilder's fans make him out to be, but he is a formidable fighter. It's just that
Come on.
all this time has passed since the first Wilder fight. All this time, has come and gone, and he is an older guy than he was then. No likelihood Wilder wins the rematch in similar fashion to how he won the first fight. Ortiz is formidable, he is, but he's a grossly overrated fighter. And the only ones overrating him are Wilder's fans, because that is the crowned jewel of his resume, the fact that he fought Luis Ortiz. Well, let me try not to fall out of my chair while you're still riding that same scooter. Understand, I gave Wilder credit for beating Luis Ortiz fresh off the fight. I gave him credit for having the fight and winning the fight. I did. But since that time, it's been blown out of proportion by none other than Wilder's fans, who can't really cite any big wins outside of that one. I mean, that's really the most formidable guy that he's beaten. But we take a deeper look at Luis Ortiz and what he's done. Why should we look at this as so huge a win for Deontay Wilder? We look at Luis Ortiz's body of work and we see that there are many things missing there. It's not like this guy's taken on a proverbial who's who of heavyweight top 10 fighters. He hasn't. His resume also leaves a lot to the imagination. Thus, beating him shouldn't be blown out of proportion. Yet, in the subsequent weeks, months, since Wilder fought this guy, they've been talking about Luis Ortiz like he's Mike Tyson, Joe Frazier, and Muhammad Ali wrapped in a burrito. Give me a break. His biggest win, his most formidable opponent that he's fought is Bryant Jennings, coming right off a loss to Vladimir Klitschko. That's the most formidable guy that he beat. You know, that really was the fight that heralded the coming of the boogeyman. After that fight, you saw a lot of people saying that Luis Ortiz was the boogeyman of the division, but his body of work simply doesn't communicate that. So while he's a formidable fighter, it shouldn't be blown out of proportion that Wilder knocked this guy out. I mean, Jesus Christ. I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing Wilder's fans won't say to try to give him extra credit for doing basic shit. He knocked out a top 10 fighter. Congratulations. How many times has Anthony Joshua done that, you know? I mean, it's regular. You're supposed to do that, especially when you're the longest reigning champion in the division. There's not a lot of reason for Anthony Joshua to have knocked out more top 10 fighters than Wilder. When Wilder's been around longer, he's been a champion longer, you know? But that's Wilder's fans. They're gonna do and say whatever they can to give you a false representation of things. So when we see that Luis Ortiz is being talked about like he's still some kind of boogeyman, well, that's what you're looking at. That's Wilder's fans continuing to polish that knob until they can see their reflection on the tip of Wilder's dick.